All right, go ahead.
Good afternoon. I am Garbo Hearne, Director of Hearne Fine Art and Pyramid Art Books and Custom Framing, located in the historic Dunbar neighborhood in Little Rock, Arkansas. In celebration of 37 years, we are starting a collector talk series with many of our amazing artists. So once a month, you'll have an opportunity to engage with one of our artists. And we're starting today with our first artist, Louise Mandumbwa, who is from Botswana, Africa, currently active in Connecticut. And I'm excited to say that I met Louise in undergrad when she was an undergraduate in Little Rock in 2016. And she's continued to amaze me with her efforts and just all of the things that Louise does. She really does well. So thank you, Louise, for being here today. And thank all of you for spending part of your Sunday afternoon with us. I'm excited. Thank you, Anna, for our education resources person who helps us make sure that we keep you informed. So thank you for conducting this interview. And I'm excited to be here and excited to see all of you. So Anna, take it away.
Actually, Louise is going to take it away. So thank
Okay.
you so much for the introduction.
Yes, thank you for the incredibly generous introduction and to everybody that's taken some time out of their afternoons to join us. Can I just double check that you can see the shared screen with the presentation? Wonderful. Great, thank you so much. So I see some familiar names in the chat, which is so heartwarming. But for those that might not be familiar, my first opportunity to showcase work, as Ms. Hearne had mentioned, was in a gallery on Wright Avenue in Little Rock, Arkansas. I'd been working with Ms. Hearne for a few months and was getting ready to start my BFA program at the University of Central Arkansas. And at 20, I had my first solo presentation. It was entitled With Feeling and was a series of portraits on paper and panel. And it marked the start of what has been a wonderful 8 years working with Ms. Hearne. I share this to underscore that getting to speak about my work on this platform and with this audience is really a privilege. I understand that it's been 37 years of building an audience, and it's been an invaluable part of my journey as an artist outside of my formal training in the classroom. So to speak a little bit about my practice and how it's developed, I'd like to touch on my earlier works and kind of speak through how I've gotten to where I am now, which is having recently attained my MFA in painting and printmaking from Yale University last spring. To touch on my earlier works, figuration has always been an incredibly important part of my visual language over the years. I was really drawn to portraiture and in particular selected subjects who were people I was in community with. I spent a lot of time interviewing them, photographing them, and rendering their likeness. I was really drawn to a three-quarter pose, portrait, or profile, and I rendered those paintings in acrylic and later in oil, but also in charcoal and through printmaking processes. Then and now, that combination of mediums in conversation was important for ranging reasons. But thematically, I was framing these works as being about home or locating some sort of home space. I moved to Arkansas from my home country when I was 18, but was born there to expatriate parents that were from Zambia. They, in turn, had parents that originated from Angola and the Congo. And as a result, as an artist, I was trying to make work about physical spaces, some of which I hadn't experienced in person. And I did that through thinking about the relational. What I found to be most exciting about these early works were the conversations they facilitated and being able to share what I knew of my subjects and their experiences in these different locations. In this framework, home wasn't a single structure or geographical location. It was located in affect and in a network of relationships that happened over time. I was interested in how the personal could speak to the universal and felt a great duty of care towards the people that entrusted me with their stories and their likenesses. I worked to attend to their images accordingly, but as I refined my craft, I started to feel some level of frustration that the portraits I was making weren't really able to fully convey the layers of nuance or even spatial relationships I was thinking about when I was making them. And that came up in conversation when I spoke with different people about the work. With movement of people in my own family and my own move across the world, I was trying to do some version of archiving in gleaning details from translated conversations with elders and cobbling together a few family photos that had survived years of migration. I was interviewing and photographing my growing network of relationships and looking to make something that felt tangible and whole from the bits and pieces that were in my palms. I was thinking about the shifts and the gaps that come with working with a living archive and the secondhand accounts within your community that are sometimes your first and only point of reference for what you can't access yourself. And it's at this juncture that my practice really expanded. Stylistically, I'd already been thinking about how building gaps into my portraits could perhaps hold space for the parts of them that I would not have the opportunity to know, sometimes because of distance or information that was lost or those people having transitioned, and the only thing I could really recall were the interactions that I'd had with them. Conceptually, I was taken by the possibility of mediating how that information could be accessed all together. I was installing work behind pieces of frosted plexiglass that interrupted your view of the work, but invited the viewer to move that piece of plexiglass close to the surface of the work so we'd be able to see it more clearly. It was almost like a focusing apparatus. If someone's likeness is one register of information, I became really interested in how diagrams and floor plans and maps drawn from memory could offer some other insight. Of all the homes that I remember and all the spaces I remember being in, I think most fondly perhaps of my grandmother's home. It was a space that we were in for days, once in the year, maybe. But I remember so clearly each of the turns in that home and also the things that were outside of it. My grandmother was an incredibly industrious woman. Is named Louise. She's my last living grandparent and the woman that I was named after. And I thought so often about the work of her hands and how that was a record that I had access to. She's a wonderful multilingual woman, but English is not one of her first languages, and it is my only language. So I was really thinking about that mediation of information that was happening through translation as well. When there are things in language that cannot be translated, how do you think about accessing or sharing or conveying the context of the information of someone's lifetime or even parts of their story? I was interested in how memory could be made tangible and material by making physical impressions or embossings into paper. So carving out marks that looked maybe a little bit like a fingerprint or felt like they were reference topology and having that embedded in the work alongside images that are more easily identifiable or figurative. I was also really interested in how I could push the compositions that I was creating. Something that was a strong feeling for me was I'd leave the background of the works blank often. And I did it for a while because I felt like if I did at some point get to start putting that information in there, I wanted to be worth it or to be able to offer some context. And so really thinking about these different registers of knowing or different ways of conveying information outside of the cartographic or something that like feels like a solid record was really in conversation with memory as I experienced it. Something that I really contended with was the fact that I have a pretty poor recall of faces. And my practice of painting portraits and thinking about figuration is in some ways trying to hold on to the memory of people's likenesses. I find that I can remember them so much more clearly after I've had the opportunity to paint them. And so for me, the act of an art practice, my art practice is really a practice of remembering and thinking what is worth recalling and remembering and sharing with other people for them to be able to take that information into their lives or into their homes in some instances. In graduate school, one of the more compelling questions I had to contend with was if language and image are two detailed registers of knowing, and they're still unable to offer a totality of an idea or location or history, when they fail, as it were, where does the work go? And the answer I arrived at was realized in my thesis work, which is that there is no singular answer. There is no totalizing truth that gets to the heart of something as nuanced and varied as the human experience or our ever evolving relationships with the spaces that we occupy. There is perhaps a very earnest grasping that happens instead. And so we hold in tension what can be grasped as nameable or concrete with what is felt and experienced through affect, what is forgotten being held in tension with what is recalled. And maybe we're closest to those truths when we hold those things in juxtaposition, the things we know and the things that only exist as presence or absence or at best approximation. I spent years interviewing people I was in community with, but this approach is what really let me consider the different ways that I knew my paternal great aunt, for example. I know her as Kaka Betty quite fondly. And I knew her, much like my maternal grandmother, through the labor of her hands and the feel of them, the things that she's left behind, and primarily those things as opposed to the stories that I'd been given. With distance and language as barriers, I thought of the shifts in her expression that I knew best, the version of her smile that I recall versus the very dignified photographs that I find of her. I thought of sugarcane, and that being something that they both grew in their gardens, along with cassava, known here in the US and Americas as yucca. I thought of the bougainvillea flowers that stretch over their front doors and the ubiquity of all those different flora, and how those things were grown and nurtured over time, much like relationships, and the garden acting as a kind of metaphor and method for understanding generational method and cultural continuity. I thought of what it might mean to make a self-portrait where the memory of the sweet things like that sugarcane is perhaps more important than my direct likeness, what it might mean to know the work of my hands better than you know my face, or perhaps my language and the words that I use in handwriting better than this. Rather than a singular work, I was invested in how multiple panel works with language and image and color and material might be in conversation. One of the works that I wanted to share in this presentation actually shares a title with what this preview is, which is Tell Me Something True. It was the first work that I'd completed in this body of work. I had an opportunity as an extension of my graduate research for my thesis to travel to a remote part of Zambia called Chavuma. It borders Zambia and Angola, and it's where my father spent the first few years of his life growing up. And throughout my own lifetime, up until the age of, I suppose I was 26 when I got to do this research trip, it had existed only as secondhand account to me. And it's a place that I got to experience for the first time in person, and it became material and real. And a really wonderful part of that conversation was excavating parts of my family history or information that I'd only heard in excerpts and attaching them to something real. So there's this combination of the botanical and the figurative that I really think to be generative and part of my practice. And what is referenced in the botanical are the leaves of a grove of trees that my family name is actually derived from. So Ndumbwa refers to a tree that is native to this area of the world, and Mandumbwa refers to the fruit of that tree. It's something that I'd found after I'd already been thinking about cassava and yucca and bougainvillea, and it felt really resonant that as I was thinking about being grafted in migration and the ways in which this record that is present in the garden can reflect those things, I found that my own family name kind of references this network or root of relationships that's happening across time and across distances. And in some ways, it lets me think about myself as a grafted thing and how the network of relationships that I will continue to build moving into the future will only enrich the work that I'm able to produce in my practice. So I've kept it a little brief, but would very much like to be in conversation with you if there's any questions you might have about the direction of my continued practice.
So I'm going to just kick us off a little bit with the question. But I also definitely encourage everyone to put their questions in the chat, as well as I will uh, unmute so people can just be in conversation and just talk to you as well. Um, but you recently finished your graduate degree at Yale. Um, School has always been a part of your, formative years in your, career. Um, do you feel like pursuing the graduate degree at a school like Yale was constrictive, or do you feel like it was freeing, and do you feel empowered by your experience at, Yale and doing an MFA program?
Thank you for your question. Yeah, I think when I was looking at programs I was interested in pursuing, one of the main criteria for me is that I wanted to be in a space that would push me in ways that I would not be able to push myself, and allow my practice to grow in ways that I wouldn't be able to grow in kind of an independent, isolated study. I was really fortunate to have a lot of invested and kind instructors during my undergraduate studies, but not many of my instructors could speak very directly to the issues of migration that I was interested in. And it was in doing research that I found faculty at Yale that were talking about post-colonial theory, which was something that my work was touching on, but I didn't have language for. And I was really excited at the prospect of being able to have more language to be able to explore my practice. And I remember my first studio visit kind of in conversation with one of the faculty. They came into my space and looked around and they said, "Oh, you're making the stuff that you applied with." And so it was a baptism by fire in some ways, but I think in a really good way because it really allowed me to think, stepping outside of the thing that I already know how to do, what else could the practice look like? And it's been really generative to see how much it's expanded, not just in terms of multiple panel works or like thinking about more than one composition, but also materially. My work expanded quite a bit in that time as well.
So I'll come back. Um, Everyone, at this time, you are allowed to unmute and ask questions if you'd like. I'll also just extend the invitation formally via Zoom. Please feel free to unmute and share your questions. There's also like a raise hand function. Um, I will just ask like probably a question that you've probably heard a lot these days. It's just like, what's next as far as academically? Does an artist go get a PhFA? What is your next, I guess, career trajectory when it comes to academics? Would you like to teach? What's
Mm.
next when it comes to your academic frame of mind when it comes to your career?
Well, I'm certain my mother would be delighted if I got a PhD, but I've been fortunate to be in the classroom. So after graduating, I was able to get a fellowship and taught for a semester and worked as a visiting artist and scholar in teaching at Southern Oregon University. And that was an incredibly enriching amount of time. As a graduate student, you're able to work as a teacher's assistant. And I've come to appreciate that as much as stewarding stories, being in conversation with people is a part of my practice. The exchange that comes with being able to teach or learn alongside people is an incredibly important part of my practice as well. And so I'm looking forward to more teaching to happen alongside my artistic practice and for that to be the direction that my, I guess, professional trajectory grows in over the next couple of years before I think about maybe more school.
Audience, definitely feel free to jump in at any time if you have any questions. Once again, the chat is open as well. Um, we do have a question coming from Barbo.
Louise, tell me about your interest in continuing your commission practice.
Oh, definitely. I think a really vital part of, I think, like I said, my practice overall has been getting to be in conversation and stewarding stories for different individuals, and that's looked like a few different things. Previously, I did a commission for the Yale Divinity School, and I was able to recreate the likeness of one of their notable alums, Rena Karifa Smart, who was the first Pan-African woman to graduate from their program as part of their bicentennial celebration. But that has also looked like people that maybe love dearly a son or a daughter or a parent and have wanted to memorialize their likeness, and have trusted me with that as well. So doing commission work is an important part of my practice. And I think in terms of being able to think about being in community with people and sharing their stories, that's always been a really wonderful thing to be able to collaborate with people and hear about the vision that they have for how they want a loved one to be remembered and making that a reality.
Can you talk about the process of how commissions come about?
Oh, absolutely. So it starts with a conversation. If the individual has a photograph that they have in mind, they often share that with me, and we're able to have a discussion about whether it's high enough detail resolution for me to be able to work from. If not, I have in the past worked with people to cobble together a bunch of older images to be able to use, or maybe offer direction in terms of how to photograph the subject. And then we decide on a timeline and often have two check-ins. So there's usually some sort of sketch that's offered early on in the process. So they're very clear on what they're getting, and we discuss about the material that the work is going to be completed in, as well as dimensions. When the work is a little further along in production, that's shared as well. And then I'm able to send over a work where they're not completely surprised at the end with exactly what's going on. If there's any notes that they have about something that they feel strongly about in terms of the representation of a loved one, we're able to kind of work that through. But it's a conversation, maybe rather than them just handing it over and me doing what I want.
Is there a specific medium that you prefer? I know that you work digitally, pastel. I mean, you haven't honed on just any one specific media. So talk about if if there is a specific media you prefer to use.
I'd say that I work on paper, which offers some versatility. So there's a lot of charcoal portraits or works in pencil that I've completed. I also do works on canvas and oil painting. I'd say of the different painting mediums, oil painting is probably specifically the one that I've honed in on. So there's like wet and dry media, if they can be kind of distinguished as such. There's drawings that are done specifically in charcoal, and then paintings that are done specifically in oil.
We do have some questions from the chat. Ms. Pamela Vance would like to know what artists have influenced you?
Oh, wonderful. One of the earliest artists that I was excited about was Njideka Akunyili Crosby. And she's a Nigerian artist that's been working in the US for the last several years and creates figurative works that incorporate several layers of information through collage. She works on paper, but what I found most compelling about her work and how she speaks about her work is how she talked about early in her career, she was relying on the human figure or the face to carry all of the information when there was more that could have been expounded upon outside of that. Another artist that I'm really interested in is Toyin Odutola, and she makes drawings primarily in color pastels, large scale, I believe on paper and other surfaces. But what's compelling about her work is like the spaces that she creates feel like they're interior, like they might occupy some space of the mind rather than a physical space. And she's often, I think, thinking about the individuals that she's in community with. So there's some wonderful women that are making incredible art that I find to be inspirations.
Thank you. We also have another question from artist Anita Thomas. How do you hope to inspire your students through instruction as they figure out their own voices?
I really think material exploration is such a rich way to find your visual voice, kind of stumbling forward and learning through the tactility of material is really wonderful. And I've had the opportunity to participate in residencies that are very much entrenched in material culture. The Golden Foundation has a residency in particular that was, I'd say, really formative to how I approach graduate school. I managed to do that residency just before I got into graduate school, and it really opened up the possibilities of what I thought was possible with the materials that I could work with. So I've been working with plexiglass and painting on plexiglass for a while, but I've also incorporated concrete and metal pouring as parts of my practice as well. So I'd say just the opportunity for discovery as you think about your visual voice and its formation is so important, exposure to as much as possible. And then I think being in dialogue with people that are different to you can be really enriching as well. Something that really helped me in undergrad was understanding how people who did not share my lived experience were entering into or engaging with the work and being able to figure out what more information I might be able to give to allow for a more productive conversation, or if I felt like I wanted to pull back and keep some of those details for myself, what that would look like.
Thank you. We'll have another question for Ms. Dance. Can you share a little bit just about, I know a lot of us are familiar with, your academic journey and how you came to Hearne Fine Art. But can you just talk about how you arrived to the decision of, pursuing art and embracing that talent and, how it was recognized as you were growing up?
Definitely. Both of my parents are educators. My mother is a high school instructor, and she teaches commerce and accounting and tourism. And my father is an art teacher. And I grew up in a part of the world that didn't have art museums. There was no MoMA, there was no Met, there was no large space where you could see a repository of visual art. A lot of the people that were artistically inclined ended up as educators very specifically because there wasn't really a robust art market for people to be able to support themselves exclusively off of the sale of their work. But I recall how much he loved teaching and how much more alive he seemed to be when he was painting. He absolutely loves being in the classroom, but he would come home and he'd get a fold out table from the garage and he'd start working, or he'd have an easel. And he seemed to come alive in a way that was very different. And as a young person, I was really taken by what was going on. I felt like there was something magical that I wanted to try and figure out a little bit more. And as I continued in my studies and I got to towards the end of high school, I was involved in a few different things and had a lot of well-meaning instructors that wanted me to do anything but art. They thought that I would be good in international relations or maybe law or journalism, something that allowed me to use the public speaking and debating that I'd been doing at the time. And I'd found that there was something maybe guarded about how people interacted with news stories that they came across. I always loved watching the human interest stories whenever the news came on, which was often in our household. And I really wanted to be able to share stories in a way that was compelling. And I'd found that when people interacted with art or images of people, there was an openness and a curiosity and a desire to understand them that was more sincere and maybe more open than how people interacted with information that they were coming across in different means and methods. And so I kind of, for a little bit, thought, oh, well, this could be a kind of journalism. I can interview people and I can get to know their stories and I can convey those stories. It just would be through affect and image more than it would be exclusively language. And as I've kind of continued on, a lot of those interests that I had in conveying stories and being in conversation with people, this kind of ethnographic or kind of bootleg archivist practice has really come full circle because I'm interested in artist books and writing is an important part of my practice. I transcribe the conversations that I have with people, and I've been making artist books that accompany the physical works that I've been making. I'm incredibly fortunate that I have parents that were maybe more understanding than the kind of wider academic space that I was in. When I was initially looking at studying art further, I picked a university that was closer to where I grew up, and my mother had said, if you're going to study, you might as well go as far as you would like to. So she said, like, really just shoot for the stars and you can always come back home and we'll always be here to support you. And I think that really gave me permission and release to pursue my craft to the best of my ability. And I've been incredibly fortunate that I've had so many people come alongside me in my academic journey. And it's taken me places that I maybe wouldn't have imagined when I was 18 and made the decision to be an artist.
Talk about your decision to come to the United States and that experience from when you first came to where you are now, and how being in the United States has helped or affected
I fell in love with the school in Georgia. There was an art school in Georgia as I was doing my research that I decided was it. It was where I was going to go. And I studied really hard through high school with the understanding that if I had good grades, that would get me in. And as I applied, I found out that there was maybe more barriers than I had initially been aware of to being able to get in. And it really was, again, community that allowed me to pursue my studies still. So we had a family friend in Arkansas that said, well, there's a community college not too far away from where we stay, and our family would love to host you if you'd like to start there and kind of make your way to whatever's next from there. And really, there's something serendipitous, I think, about the people I've crossed paths with. Since that initial time, it was winter when I left. I arrived in Arkansas to a kind of humidity I've never experienced in my life. And it was very different to what I'd anticipated the US might be like. But I think finding those moments of commonality was really wonderful. I'm naturally a more reserved individual. I'm a more introverted person. And kind of the first few relationships that I built in Arkansas was getting to interact with people and asking if they'd be willing to let me paint their portrait. And that's how I built a relationship with the city and the people in it, was through this practice of being in conversation with individuals and painting their portraits. And so it really is building a network of relationships. That's what my practice has been over this last several years. And I think getting to be here has allowed me exposure in a way that I don't know I would have been able to experience in another part of the world, because there's so many people from everywhere here. And so I've been able to learn from people that are from places that are from the US, but also like far flung and very far away from the US. And because this is a nation in a lot of ways of people with different stories, it's allowed me to find those threads of human experience that overlap and see how, regardless of what people's specific experiences are, affect or being able to speak to emotional experiences acts as a kind of universal language in a way that's beautiful.
So is there a difference than being in the South and being on the East Coast? I mean, you've been around different areas. How has that affected your practice?
I think there's a pleasant familiarity in small town America. I've spent some time in New York and then also places in upstate New York that reminded me of the South. And then I went to the West Coast and I was in a place called Ashland, Oregon, which is 4 hours away from Eugene, Oregon. And there was something about this small town America experience that again reminded me of the South. And maybe I'm appreciating as I'm visiting different parts of the country that there is maybe some shared experience in smaller spaces that I find deeply comforting. In that people just have a little more time and are a little more willing to be in conversation with people that they might not know immediately. And bigger, more metropolitan spaces that I've been in, there's a briskness, but I think there's just a different set of rules for engagement. I won't say that people are less friendly. Everybody's maybe just trying to get to where they're trying to get to. But I think there's been an openness that I've really appreciated across the board with different people from different parts of the country.
So let's talk about your future. You are anticipating moving back home, teaching, working, and keeping a connection here. Talk about that.
I'm looking at being in the US for the next few years. So, because I've been here on a student visa, that means I'm in the process of applying for an artist visa that will allow me more time to work professionally in the US. Specifically, I'm really interested in being an educator and working towards that and maintaining my professional art practice, producing work and engaging in shows and so on. But long term, I really have an interest in bringing all of the things that I've learned in the, is it 8 years now that I've been in the US, and being able to make that accessible to people that don't necessarily have the means or fortune to be able to come and study here. I think that's quite an undertaking and doesn't happen without a lot of support, and not everybody's able to get that support regardless of how talented they are. And so I think of education as a means of being able to share the things that I've learned and to be in conversation with artists that are not necessarily here in the US. I hope to maintain a relationship with the many people that I've spent time with here. And the dream scenario, I think, is to kind of bifurcate my life such that wherever I am, I'm always able to come back and engage with artists and art spaces in the US, while also thinking about what it looks like to be a good neighbor, a good community member in all of the spaces that I have called home, and give back to the spaces that have allowed me to be the person or become the artist that I am today.
So we do have a question from Facebook from Marcus Crutchfield. He wants to know, did you get rejection now or in the past? And how did you apply the art criticism to be better and improve for future chances in exhibitions and commissions?
Sorry, could you ask that once more?
So the question is, did you, as far as earlier in your career or even now, as like, how do you deal with rejection? How do you, um, redirect and apply any criticism that you may have received for future opportunities?
I think when I was younger, I really leaned into the reality that I do not know what I do not know. And that sometimes on the other side of rejection is coming up with better questions for myself, whether that's in my studio practice or how I'm answering questions, and also recognizing that things come back around. I find that even when there have been rejections in my life, nothing is ever wasted. So that could mean the time that is spent learning a skill that seems like it doesn't necessarily pay off immediately comes back around and is meaningful to my practice a few years later. So I try to keep that in mind when I experience rejection, that nothing is wasted. I feel like the opportunities that I have had the pleasure of going through, I have often felt ready for them. And sometimes they're the things that I applied for multiple times. And I recognize in the moments that I've gotten to engage with those spaces, whether that's a residency or teaching or something else, that had I gotten the thing that I thought I wanted 3 years prior, I would not have been able to make the most of it. So I initially did my associates and then I did my bachelor's degree. And for a time, I was like, oh, I really wish I'd been able to just do my bachelor's and just do that concentrated amount of time without the additional years that I did my associates. But I found that the level of maturity that allowed me when I got to graduate school, and I was still on the younger end actually of my cohort, but if things had happened the way that I had hoped, I don't know that I would have been ready to walk into some of the spaces that I've been in. Rejection is incredibly difficult. I think sometimes when you pin your hopes on, after I achieve this, my experience will be this. And when things don't pan out that way, that's an interesting thing to navigate. But for a long time, for example, getting my master's was my highest dream. And now that I've achieved it, it's a really wonderful opportunity, though there are rejections, to reimagine what the next dream needs to look like and what the next several years need to look like. Now that I've made it to the variable end of what was my 10-year plan that I set out when I was 18.
Thank you for that. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. We have another question from the chat. Miss Mims uh, really wants to talk about the tone, in your art. It definitely has a very serious and heaviness to it. Can you talk about your approach and, that intensity and seriousness that comes into play when it comes to your process or, even the final product?
Absolutely. So I think often the weight that perhaps I am feeling is that I'm being entrusted with someone's likeness, and not everybody has a full context for how forward facing those images might be. In getting to be in conversation with people, you're maybe a little more aware of maybe a certain quirk that they're sensitive about, or maybe they have a gap in their teeth they're a little conscious about that might make for a more compelling, more interesting image. But I'm really interested in extending the trust that has been given to me and being a good steward of what has been given to me and thinking about what it might look like to have that image of that person exist out in the world. And for a long time, I was really interested in that being a very dignified image. So there's like a stillness, I think, that has maybe been characteristic of my works, a kind of stillness or a stoic air that has existed in the work. But in terms of intention on my part, I'm only ever trying to make sure that I am sharing the images of the people that I'm getting to paint or draw in a way that's as dignified as possible, kind of regardless of their station in life and what they do. So I've painted everybody from academics to people that are cleaners, to people that are general contractors. And I wanted to treat each of them with the same level of dignified respect and try to keep that in mind when I'm selecting images. I think another thing that's opened up in my practice in thinking about where the detail kind of lands in the work has been thinking about what version of them they're willing to share with me. So if I have a personal relationship with someone, they might be more willing to laugh with me or share themselves with me in a way that they wouldn't with an absolute stranger. And often the people that are coming across those images, unless it's a commissioned work that someone has asked for of someone that they know, is a stranger to them. And so I'm also thinking about, well, how would this person present themselves or want to present themselves, maybe to people that are just getting to meet them for the first time. One of the artists that I really enjoy, her name is Jennifer Packer. She had an exhibition that was titled The Eye is Not Satisfied with Seeing. And I find that as visual people, we often take for granted because we see something, we know it. And there's sometimes a desire to see everything about an interior of someone's home or every aspect of their expression because it makes us feel like we know that person a little bit better. Where I'm really interested in thinking about if someone were to approach me, what would it look like for them to approach me on my terms?
Okay. Question. Is there a timeline for portraiture? Say a parent wants to capture their child from the beginning to a certain period of time. Is there a timeline that you think is important that a person might consider doing?
Like an age to start doing some sort
Yes,
of
yes,
representation?
yes.
I have not been around children in a while, but I want to say around 4 years old is where their personality really starts to shine. And I think that's really wonderful to like start to capture the things that distinguish that young person as they're navigating the world and are excited about things. Because children change so much, I think, over a short period of time. So anytime there's those moments of excitement or discovery, I think all of those are wonderful opportunities to be able to encapsulate or memorialize or hold on to that memory and make it last a little bit longer.
We have a question from the chat. It's a really great question. Just considering portraits, have you ever done a self portrait? And if you haven't, would you consider doing one? And then I have a follow up question. Do you have a dream subject or venue? Like, is the National Portrait Gallery the goal?
Oh, goodness. To answer the first question, I have made something adjacent to a self-portrait. One of the slides in the presentation was work on canvas that had a long drawing on the side of it. So it was like a two-panel work, and that's maybe the closest I've gotten to being able to make a self-portrait. There's something about my likeness that I don't necessarily have a hard time with my likeness. I feel like it's getting better as I get older. But when I was younger, when I was first making work, I remember people came into the gallery and they looked around and they said, "Oh, you need to draw more women." And I hadn't realized up until that point that all of the people that I was drawing were people that reminded me of my uncles and my fathers and my aunts and my mom and people that felt very stable in my world, in my worldview. And because I was still figuring things out about myself and kind of coming into my own as a young adult, I had a really hard time capturing myself in a way that felt as concrete as doing a portrait of myself. And that actually included other people that reminded me of myself. I had a hard time doing portraits of people that were about my age, also young women, also immigrant women, because there was something that felt like it was so much in flux that the precision that I really valued at the time and that I held on to at the time was in conflict with. It didn't feel like the two things like really gelled. So there's one assignment I did in undergrad that required us to do so, and I've made one kind of portrait adjacent image of my own volition at this point. But I do feel like I'm getting closer to like thinking about what a self-portrait might look like And even then, I feel like it has so much to do with the labor of my hands, or the focus or the detail being in my hands a little bit more than in my face. And the second question, could you repeat for me? Was where's my dream place to end up?
Your dream subject? Who would you, do you have anyone, that you want to capture? Do you want to get the call maybe in the future for a presidential
Yeah,
portrait? Like, I mean, what is the, like, is there a dream person that you'd like to capture? And is there a platform where you'd like to see your work?
I'm unsure about platform as of yet, but I would so love to be able to do a series of portraits of artists that I look up to. I am such a admirer of artists, and I feel like I learned so much from them. And I've gotten to do some portraits of other artists, and there's something really special about the kind of dialogue that you have with someone that is most likely used to also being on the other side of the canvas, as opposed to being the subject, or a front-facing subject. So I think there's a couple artists that I have in mind that I'd absolutely love to be able to make portraits of.
I think you should go for it. Just call them up and just say, "Hey, let's swap some work. Let's swap some portraits." We do have another question from Miss Anita Thomas. As you mold your voice in your work, do you ever worry about how your work is received? Does that play a part in whether you push yourself further or hold back from exploring a direction?
I feel like graduate school allowed me to be indulgent, if I can put it that way, because I was thinking first and foremost, and maybe even prior to graduate school, I was thinking about how the work would be received by the people that love that person, particularly when it was a subject kind of outside of my direct family. I really felt strongly about, like, if someone that loves so and so sees this image, will they not just like recognize what they look like, but will they feel like, oh, you've really captured something about the spirit of this person? And that for a long time had been my first and foremost interest. Over the years, as I've had a little more opportunity to show my work in different spaces, and see how different audiences outside of the people that I'm in community with experience the work, I feel more and more like a leaning toward abstraction or obfuscation, or something that slows down the read, feels important. Because in commercial spaces, at times, there's a very quick read or a very quick consumption, of what is a, a project of care, if I can put it that way. And so I think thinking about a visual voice that asks for a slower reading, is something that I feel strongly about, so that, like, whatever they're arriving at, it's not a snap judgment. It's because they've required a little more time to like sit with what they're looking at. But I also recognize that there's very little I can do to control what people are bringing with them into a space when they see the work. And so having the opportunity to incorporate writing, or diagrams, I think is another way to offer them an entry point for the context that I'm approaching different things with.
Thank you. Just grounding us a little bit in the present. I am a person who is a higher ed practitioner, so we see, the attacks on higher ed and international students. As an international artist, and then, what are, the thoughts in your artist community? How are you all feeling? How have things changed because of our current administration? Do you feel like we will see a departure of, artists from this country? What are your thoughts on the current, administration and the targeting of international students?
Yeah, I'm not sure about a departure per se, but I do know that there's a lot of concern for what the future looks like. And as much as I can appreciate that there never really is consistency, or there's never control that we have about how things play out, this is certainly a moment in time where it feels like things are maybe more out of our control, or harder to predict than they have been in the past. One thing I will say about artists and the people that I'm in community with is, I have often felt that they are some of the most generous and kindest people that I've gotten to interact with. And I feel like that sentiment has proven to be true in times like these more and more, that there's a real concerted effort for artists and people in our communities to rally around one another and offer each other support in this time, especially in academia. I think that has been something, as I finished up my studies and we were just kind of getting into this tenuous space then, that I observed and am deeply appreciative of.
Thank you. I am on that note. I mean, I think you definitely wrapped it up beautifully, as far as, grounding us in the present. I would like to definitely share, with our audience members how you can support Louise and her efforts as she continues to, build her career, and continue to progress. This is the Hearne Fine Art website. There is work available. This is just a preview of what's to come. Definitely keep your eyes glued to your inboxes as we start to, consider, new works in the exhibition. Thank you so much for being with us this evening or afternoon. Louise, thank you for taking time out. We are so excited to be a part of your journey and hope to continue, working with you as you progress in your career. We're so very proud of you. And thank you again. Mama, did you want to give any last remarks?
Again, I am so appreciative of Louise for being so honest and forthcoming, and for the work that you continue to do, and the excellence that you portray in everything that you do, and all of the people on this call who have supported Louise, and artists who are here to learn and to be a part of what Louise is going through as an artist. We are so happy to have you here. We hope that you will continue to follow Louise and think about getting a commission. Now is the time. While Louise is here with us for the next couple of years, now is the time to get a commission and continue her journey. Reach out to me, 501-372-6822. You have my website. And again, I'd like to give Louise the opportunity to have the last word of this afternoon.
Thank each of you so much for your time, and of course, the people that are getting to listen in, not just on the Zoom, on Facebook. It's really meant so much to be in conversation with you and again, see so familiar names from across the years. I hope you have a wonderful start to your June.
All right. Thanks again, and have a good rest of the afternoon.